Welcome back. It's difficult to define exactly what is a short runway. Clearly, that depends on the landing performance figures of your airplane. However you choose to define a short runway, there are probably plenty to be found in your regional area, as shown here. I attended an air show recently at an average GA airport in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. As I watched planes approach and land in the early morning haze, I saw planes approach high, I saw planes approach fast, and I saw planes approach high and fast. What I didn't see was any airplane that actually put it down on the numbers as I was taught to do many years ago. Earlier this year, Aviation Safety Videos explored an idea put forth by John Kutcher, a designated pilot examiner out of Baltimore, that suggests we mark all short runways with a go-around decision point marking, or GDP. I think this is an idea with merit. However, it has long been known that the best landings come from a long, stabilized approach. If you develop the precision to put your plane on the numbers consistently, time and time again, at the proper airspeed, landing on a short runway within the performance figures of your aircraft should be a relatively easy task. I had the good fortune to fly with my brother, Don Reed, this weekend and explore a concept that Don calls the circle of action. Don is a retired Army military test pilot who graduated from the Naval Test Pilot Academy in Pax River, Maryland. Don now manages the flight test department for the Mars Orion project at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. I'll let Don explain a technique he learned in the military he calls the circle of action.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today to be able to talk to you about a technique that I've used over the years to help me better control my flight path as I approach into the runway. And that technique is a circle of action. So let's first talk about what is the circle of action. So a circle of action is an area on the runway that you can choose that if you were to continue with your flight path on a stabilized approach, that's where your aircraft would actually impact on the runway. So with a circle of action, it is a passive aid that allows you to manage your flight path. So how do you use a circle of action? Well, the way the circle of action works is that as you pick this point on the runway, as you establish your stabilized flight path on the final approach, is that flight path, that circle of action, should maintain its position relative to, say, the windscreen on your aircraft. So as you start to approach, if you notice that your circle of action is actually starting to move further away from you or moving up on the windscreen, what that tells you is that your actual circle of action is moving closer to you, which means it's moving off the runway, which means you're going to impact the ground short of the runway. So that tells you you're getting low on your approach and that you need to get back up and increase the height of your glide path. If the actual circle of action is moving closer to you, that says you're going to fly over it and that your actual impact point is further down the runway, so you're getting too steep and you need to bring your glide path, get back down onto your glide path. So the technique that's best used, and again, one of the keys to a short field landing is energy management, so that you have the minimum amount of energy at the time when you cross the circle of action before you flare. So a technique that I use is when I'm coming in on the final approach, I will use pitch attitude to control my airspeed, and I always stay right on top of airspeed because that's the most amount of energy that you're going to have that you need to bleed off during your flare and landing. So airspeed control is critical, and the primary control for controlling the airspeed is pitch attitude. So I constantly am watching airspeed with pitch, and then I manage my actual glide path relative to the circle of action with power.
Those things that he talked about. Basically, we're trying to hit a spot on the runway. And how's this related to safety? I think it's related to safety. And, most times, let's face it, when we decided to do this, I started looking at the sectional charts. Well, you can't really find a short runway. You started looking around. Try and find a runway under 2,000 feet. This one's 2,600. Agreed? I mean, I looked within 50 miles here, and except for 1 or 2 private grass strips, which clearly I'm not allowed to go into, the shortest thing I could find was Regal up by Hershey, and it's 1,950 feet. Displaced threshold on the one runway because it's there's a road in front of it, but we still had 1,650 feet. So I think the bigger issue here, the bigger lesson is to be able to learn judgment and be able to put your airplane on a spot. So that day when you have an engine out emergency or something, you're going to be able to put it. I mean, do we fly over metropolitan areas and look around and go, where am I going to go if my engine quits? What, anybody ever think that? Are we thinking that when we're up there? Or have we all been flying for so long, we just figure that thing's going to keep running because it did for 23 years, minus one day. I did have an engine failure back in 2002. We do have a gentleman here who thinks about it quite a bit. Good for you. So you're never caught unprepared. Because I can tell you that day our cylinder went flying off our engine. It was only 10 months old, had 250 hours. Did I think it was going to fail? Heck no. You know, that was the furthest thing from our mind. I love teaching. I love teaching students. Yeah. But anyways, I try to make this as simple as possible, keep it simple. And I think it's just like a math problem. It should be as simple as 1, 2, 3, okay? 1 + 2 = 3. That'll always be true. And if we change some part of the equation, we've changed some other part of the equation for it to be true. Okay? So basically what Don was trying to get across there is pitch plus power equals airspeed. Can we all agree? Anybody doesn't agree with that? You know, and I think where that's most easy to see is when I climb out in my Tiger, if I take off I always take off at full power. If I keep about 1 inch of horizon above the front of that canopy or the front of the cowling, I should see 90 knots on the airspeed indicator. And I do. And I do. Until the one day I climbed out and it said 75. I'm looking out. I know I got the engine running full power because I can hear it. I look out there and I can see 1 inch of horizon, and I look at my airspeed indicator. It says 75, and I'm baffled for about 10 or 15 seconds until I look out the window and see that I forgot to put the flaps up. Bafflement gone. But that's the kind of stuff we need to be prepared for. I mean, full power and horizon should equal 90 knots. It's an equation, and if it doesn't, something else in the equation's wrong, and you need to fix it. Same thing applies here. 1 + 2 = 3. Pitch plus power equals airspeed. So part of the given in this equation is 1,500. It's just something I've learned, and 1,500 is what works for me. My approach speed 70 knots. So if I have 1,500 and the attitude I'm used to seeing out there and the attitude that'll get me down on that mark on the runway, I should see a 70-knot airspeed, and always keep that 70 knots. Now, if I change part of that equation, haven't changed this, but if I change my pitch to a steeper, of course, the speed's going to increase. And if I lighten my reduce my pitch attitude, I'm going to get dangerously slow, like we saw that 172 in that second video. The other thing Don talked about is power controls glide path. Like I said, I generally do my approaches at 1,500. It's what works for me. So basically, what happens we start sinking below, like Don said. What will happen is that spot. You know, you'll see it. A lot of this is nothing new, but it's something I think probably maybe not forgotten in this group, but I can tell you what, from what I've seen, forgotten by a lot of people. As the airplane sinks below the glide path, like Don said, you'll see that spot start to move up, you know, in your windshield. At which point, I bring power up. Maybe I'm an anal retentive chowderhead. I don't know, but I like doing things in increments, you know. So, and I try to get my students to do that, and they don't quite grasp the concept. But I'll bring it up 200 RPM. When you add power, if you touch nothing else, if I've added power and I'm trimmed for 70 knots, what's going to happen? Something else has to change. Right, exactly. What changes is my pitch attitude. The nose is going to start to, you know, increase the pitch. And that's okay because I'm still flying at 70 knots. And that's another concept I found newer pilots don't understand. If they've trimmed it for 70, it'll fly 70. If they add more power, they start panicking, the nose goes up or whatever, and they don't realize it's going to still fly, basically, at least the Tiger will, at that trimmed airspeed. So what happens is now here I've climbed back up. I'm back up now. I'm back up on the glide path. Everything is looking right now. My circle of action will be a little bit further out ahead of me. But now I reduced my power 100 RPM because 1,500 wasn't working. I got a stronger headwind than normal this day. So now I just reduced my power to 1,600, and that takes me down to the glide path and gets me down right on this spot.
Well, I hope today's lesson on circle of action is a technique that you can go off and practice and refine to help increase the precision of your approaches. And again, just keep in mind that in general, you want to manage your airspeed with pitch control and then manage your glide path control with power. And also keep in mind that if you refine this technique and work on your precision, that in the event of an emergency, like an engine failure,
Mayday, mayday. cylinder. We've lost the cylinder.
But you can use this technique also to determine whether or not you're able to reach a landing area, and can therefore adjust your glide path such that you can get to an area that's a suitable emergency landing area. And thank you very much. For Aviation Safety Videos, this is Don Reed. Have a safe flight.